All right, everybody, I want to introduce a new friend of mine. He's editor and he's also a horror enthusiast and comic book aficionado like myself. He has co-hosted Pulp Nightmare and Hercules versus the podcast. I've gotten to know him recently, and he's one of the most considerable and underrated voices in media storytelling. He is podcaster and writer for Box Office Pulp. He's Mr. Mike Napier.
Wow, you really pumped me up there.
So Mike, what got you interested in doing your podcast in the first place?
God, it was so long ago. I think originally me and my best friends MB started doing this little comedy podcast called Pulp Nightmare, and it was just mostly out of our interest in podcasts. Back then, I can't believe I'm back then. I feel it's going to turn into dust. Podcasting was still kind of semi in its infancy. Like, there were bigger podcasts at the time, but they were mainly just talk and casual. There was no, nowadays things are more radio show like with podcasts, which sometimes confuse me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really understand when shows turn to like morning zoo shows for some reason. But back then it was a lot more casual. So we thought like, oh, let's have fun. We go into weird places, and Pulp Nightmare, we kind of just started developing a brand idea of what everything was. And through that, the Pulp Podcast Network. And we ended up kind of expanding. Our friend Cody guested on an episode. And after we recorded, he just started pitching us a movie podcast idea called Box Office Pulp. So, and we all talked about movies constantly. And we really had an interest in not really being a fan of a lot of movie podcasts that were out of there. So I think when it comes to podcasting, one thing I like to do, and one thing the others as well like to do, is we look at voids that are out there that aren't quite catering to things we like. It's like that old Stan Lee thing when it comes to comic books, write just what would entertain you. A lot of movie podcasts are either just straight review shows, or they're not really looking that in depth into things, or it's just they're not particularly on topic, or if they are like analysis shows, they're dry as hell. It's like film historian stuff, and we want to be more fun. So like with Box Office Pulp, we looked at, all right, well, we're not really a movie review show. We're going to look at everything. We're going to look at new stuff. We're going to look at old stuff. And we're going to look at certain topics, certain directors. And we're going to do film analysis, but in a fun way. Like, we're an explicit podcast. And I consider Box Office Pulp to be kind of, I always call it a movie party. It's like we're the podcast equivalent of after you leave the theater, you go to a diner and just discuss like the movie you just had. But because just naturally in our lives, we're writers. We're interested in the bones of storytelling, of filmmaking. We're students. I took film school classes and stuff. And
me too.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. I think it's more like the equivalent, if what you're trying to say is like a do what you love and the rest will follow.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of stuff that's very, like with the comic book podcast, graphic novelism, there's shows all over the place that look at just what comes out this month, or this story, or just do interviews. Like, we do interviews, but we also want to look at what's the history of the medium. With graphic novels, we're a comic book history podcast, not just of characters, but this event happened. What exactly took place? Where did Image Comics come from? What's the history of comic book cartoons? One of our most successful series was a little mini series where we looked at all the great unpublished works in comics. We looked at Twilight of the Superheroes. We looked at unpublished Batman graphic novels or storylines, all kinds of things that have kind of been lost to time that would have also changed the course of comics, like Jack Kirby
Mhm.
wanting to originally kill off Thor, and he took that pitch to DC Comics and created the New Gods out of it. And just really examining like the butterfly effect of these things. In all things, there's a bit of worry of fatigue, but I always try to remember that back in the 50s, there was about like I think I did a count once, and like 1955, there was 22 westerns that were released, and about 9 of them were singing cowboy films.
So
So
we're
whenever
not talking
whenever
John Wayne here.
yeah,
No.
so whenever I like start going like, oh man, I can't believe I got to go to the theater again for another one. I always remember like, okay, I should just feel blessed more than anything else because at least there's not like that going on.
I I don't know the last to be honest with you, I was never a Western fan, but the last I guess you could call it a Western that I had seen was Blazing Saddles, but that was more satire. That was more satire than anything.
I will still say Blazing Saddles is one of the best westerns ever made. That and Back to the Future Part 3.
Yeah, lots of people don't like that one, but I mean, I like it more than the second one, honestly, because it's more about the message of it at the end, like your future is what you make it. It hasn't been created yet. Us being movie lovers, it's not just the storyline, but it's the closing. It's how it comes together in the end.
The ending of Back to the Future Part 3 is randomly beautiful. We actually just did a commentary series for the Back to the Future films. We got really nerdy about those films. Weirdly walked away from that at being a better writer, which was a fascinating experience.
Yeah, it's been called one of the I think it is my understanding like the best written film ever. I mean that's probably debatable, but that's what it's kind of been circulated to be. Just the script. It's like the most perfect movie ever made.
Oh, I buy that claim. Like it really like we kind of broke it down, examined the nuts and bolts of it going through. You take so much of the first film for granted, like
Mhm.
storytelling wise, and you realize that it invented so much and what it pulls off so deftly, and it's a miracle movie to me. Like I don't know how that thing can exist.
I feel the same way about it, especially now how people have made the eerie connections between how it's supposedly told the future of our generation, like with everything from like the 3D animation to like the Twin Towers. I mean, it's just lots of these little things that come out in it, and conspiracists kind of nitpick at it, but I see it more as just fun. I mean, it is eerie, the similarities. Don't get me wrong, but in a way, it's kind of like you have to take it with a grain of salt, and I appreciate it for what it is.
Oh yeah, and I mean, uh, one thing to marvel at it is just the performance of Tom Wilson as Biff.
He's very underrated. People don't really mention. I mean, they like Biff, but they're more focused on Marty McFly. But yeah, he's a good, not just like a supporting character. Second movie, I don't really think he's supporting. He's one of the main villains. But yes, yes.
It's on so many different. He wears so many different hats, including a cowboy hat. Why did he just go back to stand up? He should just be doing everything. And he was
I
such a
don't
good
know.
villain.
I don't know. I think I'm probably going to do a segment on that later where our supporting cast went. I didn't know he was a comic.
Yeah. Oh, he has a great thing. We went into in one of the commentaries, but he, whenever he's doing a set, he can usually feel whenever people are like in the audience, kind of rustling around because he's Biff. So he usually stops the show and does like a quick 5-minute Q&A just for it to get out of everybody's system. So that way he can just do his set. He also like hands out cards that have like an FAQ on them of like various things people just ask him about Back to the Future just to get it out of the way.
The podcast that I have heard from you guys did your own little review on the remake of Pet Sematary. Now, in your opinion, has it really stayed true to form, or do you prefer the original?
Um, I prefer the newer version actually.
Really?
Yeah. I'm a fan of the original film. I see the original film as probably objectively a better made movie. I think from a technical filmmaking standpoint, I would say maybe the newer one. Newer one has a lot of the direction has a little bit more artistic nature to it in certain things that kind of bring out the themes. But if I were to put the two back to back,
Hmm.
like the original's a classic
Oh yeah.
and nothing can take away from that. But I look at the newer one, and the newer one I kind of almost originally was a little softer on, but as the time's gone on, even since recording that episode, I've come to like it even more because it really, for me, hones in on the themes of King's work in a stronger way, and ultimately the performances are better. And for that kind of story, you really need strong performances.
Yeah,
Um,
I think the only remake or reboot from King's work that I've appreciated so far was the It, and that's
yeah,
just basically who they got to play, the character. Um, but I mean, nothing can take away from Tim Curry. I love Tim Curry. I love him and everything he's done. And I don't get scared easily. That scared me some. I'm not gonna lie. Like the original It. I wasn't too much scared by it, but I liked it. I had this love for it, and I hate clowns, but I love that movie. And I have yet to see though the new Pet Cemetery because every time there's these remakes and reboots coming out, I give it a chance.
I think that's definitely worth giving a chance. I'm kind of bummed it didn't do better, but we discussed in our episode came out too close to us. It came out against Shazam, which is a big family movie, and it just came out in like a really weird time. Probably should have been saved for a little bit earlier in the year at best, because Pet Cemetery I don't think was ever going to bring in like it money.
No,
And it
no.
is, I could argue, is one of the greatest horror films of all time.
Oh
Like,
yeah. The new
it's
one was so
superb.
graphic too. A lot more graphic than people were were anticipating.
Well, we're so used to the TV movie, which is great. I'm a huge fan of it, but it's also, it's silly. Um, okay, like we always joke that the It miniseries may or may not be written by aliens, just for how weird some of the dialogue is. That's not even from King's work. Just people seem to like talk like they're not human, and it's so bizarre. The Tim Curry series is excellent. Like I love it to death, but it's also kind of unintentionally funny at times. And the new one is I'm kind of just obsessed with the directing in the new one. Like I'm a sucker for anything that starts doing Deutsch angles. And like gothic architecture and Deutsch angles are like my favorite goddamn thing. It's half the reason why I love the Nuns so much.
It's funny that you mention it because I recently saw that movie and I had high hopes for it, and it didn't get me. I mean, I liked the concept of it, and it said based on a true story and all that, but it didn't get me how I was hoping it would.
The
And
Nun.
I don't think it paid. Yeah, I don't think it paid justice to its format.
Yeah, I can see how. I think the Nun is one of those Rorschach test movies where people are just gonna take away what they take away from it, and some
Hmm.
people are either gonna love it, some people are just gonna be like, "What did I even just watch?" And Valak's so simple, but I love Valak from a writing standpoint too because you can just do anything with Valak. Like, oh, you want some kind of like physical ghost threat to be there? Valak resurrected something. You want to just have screwy mind stuff where nothing's really real. Valet can do that too. Valet can
Yeah.
conjure snakes, or Valet can do this. Valet can throw elements at you, just anything. And I love when characters are created as catch-alls like that, because it just gives you license to go crazy.
One of my favorite movies, and this came out, I believe it was 2001. I want to say 2001 or two. It was 13th Ghosts, and I think that's one of the most underrated horror films, in my opinion. It has one of the most terrifying movie. I won't call them a monster, but the ghosts were actually based off of real people. If you go look them up, the Jackal #1. That man, that bitch, that is not a game. That is a real person, or the Jackal was a real person.
It's funny you bring up 13 Ghosts. If you ever want to come on the podcast and talk about 13 Ghosts, I'm totally
for
down.
sure.
We love 13 Ghosts. 13 Ghosts are my favorite, I guess, guilty pleasures.
Mm-hmm.
And the ghost design is so good. Who doesn't love the Jackal? Who doesn't
Everybody.
love, who doesn't love the bloody princess? Like, it's just everything's so good, and just Matt Lillard just being over the top. And the set design like that, it's so silly. Like, I think William Castle would have been so proud of that remake.
I love the concept for it. I love the art in it. I mean, even the blood effects. Those were so. Most people either they'll take it over the top, or like it to me, like the blood doesn't look right or feel right. But they did a very good job. Like the scene where the guy, I think it's his predecessor, goes downstairs, like get the money, and he like releases the princess, and he ends up getting like chopped in half by the door, and you just see the backside of him like sliding down the glass. It was great.
Oh, superb gore effects.
It was wonderful. I love it. And the thing about that, I don't think that as a kid seeing that, I was like, I don't know, 10 maybe when that came out, and there was a few nights where I couldn't go into the hallway to the bathroom by myself because it was dark, and I just seen, because in the back of my head I can picture like the Jackal following me. So yeah, it did it did terrify me as a kid. I've not seen. I want to know what that would look like as a Halloween costume. If anybody's ever done that, that would be great.
Oh yeah, I've never seen anybody do any 13 Ghosts like cosplay or Halloween costumes before.
I seen it at a haunted house, but it was part of like an asylum theme, but not like an actual costume. And I think they used like partly electronics for it, because like there was an actor behind it, but the glass would like just like blank out, and all of a sudden you would see it run up to you on the glass. So it was an animatron. It was an electronic like prop too, but. And now reverting back to one of the podcasts that you co-host, the Hercules versus the podcast, it got me thinking about the old Hercules movie from the 1970s that starred Arnold Schwarzenegger, Hercules in New York.
Of course. Hercules in New York is a classic. And no one can tell me otherwise. It is one of the most baffling films arguably ever made, and I love it so much. And it's great because I love how you can kind of track Arnold's career as an actor, starting with Hercules in New York. He seems confused through most of the film, and it's kind of great. And it's one of those movies I just want to be like in on the pitch meeting of just what went into the genesis of it. Like, who thought this was a thing to do? Like, all the old Italian Hercules movies are some of my like favorite things, and they're not even really Hercules movies. They only are in America, which always kind of amuses me. But those movies put Hercules into like the cultural osmosis, but they're like not good. So they create like Hercules as this mythic figure of of film, when really everyone, like, he's mythic because of the mythology that everyone's like taught and is in books and in history, but everyone's like film idea of Hercules are a lot of things no one's actually watched, and just comes from like these badly dubbed like Steve Reeves like Italian movies, and then you just get Hercules in New York, and then like the Lou Ferrigno one, which is like crazy.
Oh my god!
And then there's like nothing until you get to Kevin Sorbo in the '90s, which is like the okay, we all think we remember what Hercules movies are like, but there's not really Hercules movies. So we're just going to make a TV show based off of our recollections
Of
that are
Hercules.
wrong of Hercules movies.
Mainly, of course, the first one I was introduced to, being as young as I am, was Disney's Hercules. Yeah,
Of course,
I liked it, of course.
it's
I
so
loved,
good.
Hera. I love the whole aspect of it. But it got me interested in, mythology and the study of Hercules and the gods and everything like that. So it kind of, I think it had like a bittersweet ending to it.
The Hercules story has a very bittersweet ending.
Yes. The real
And
ending, however, Disney completely fluffed that one up. But the real the real story to Hercules was not so nice.
oh, I would have liked to have seen the Disney movie ending with Hercules' skin burning off because of the semen of a centaur, as he is then crucified and descends to Mount Olympus.
That's
The kid's got to learn somehow.
Oh, we should make art. We should make an art poster for that. That would be pretty cool.
Oh, that would be so good. Can people do that, please?
I know somebody who does Tales from the Crypt art because he runs his own fan podcast for that. I'm gonna ask him. I'll send you a copy. We've got to get that printed.
Oh, please, that would be so cool.
Coming back to you, as a writer, you did some contract work as a screenwriter for some unreleased production earlier on.
Yeah, they were unfortunately not produced. They got decently far along, but they were actually UK productions, but BBC changed some stuff and they kind of went kaput. But yeah, I wrote two scripts. One entirely based off an idea of mine. So technically, I actually own that one. I can do what I want with it. The other one is owned, so I can't really touch it. I'm very proud of that one, which is unfortunate because I can't touch it. It's weird that I was working for the BBC technically, of all things. But yeah, one was called Security Guard and was kind of a gritty 70s throwback type of film noir type. A little Taxi Driver inspired, but I
Mhm.
was also really inspired by the the 80s style writing of Frank Miller. I was very inspired by that. And I kind of want to do kind of a noir deconstruction and like something about violence and the effect of violence. And the other one was just a serial killer story called The Maw, um, which I was happy with. The idea was when security guards started getting a little shaky is whether or not it could be developed because I went kind of hog wild with the script. Like there was this big fire sequence, the whole thing. It's still low budget, but it was a little bit bigger than maybe originally intended. So like, let's do a small one. And the director was pretty much like, Mike, you're good at people talking to each other for long periods of time and nothing really happening. Can you just do that for a script? Which was a weird backhanded compliment. So I thought like, okay, I'll do like a psychological thriller, even though that's not really a genre.
It's kind of like saying your ass looks fat, but those are nice pants.
Exactly. Like, thanks? Question mark. So I came up with this. A lot of stuff I write kind of comes back to depression in some way in a lot of instances.
Mhm.
Even Security Guard dealt with that. And I like writing to psychological effects of different kind of stimuli, which is why Security Guard was about violence and how that kind of can sort of take you over. And Maul was kind of a simple cat and mouse story between this psychologist who helped capture this serial killer years ago. But now from prison, the killer has kind of orchestrated this kidnapping, all to bring the psychologist in for essentially like with the setup of you have an hour to get the location of this kidnapped person out of me. With, of course, the wrinkle that the killer actually had killed the psychologist's wife. So there's a lot of hatred there. And it's never been produced, so I can just spoil it. And it kind of like the psychologist has deep depression, like marriage fell apart after the murder of the daughter, and you can kind of tell, it's never said, but sort of on the verge of maybe ending his life, maybe not. And then throughout the course of the real time conversation, kind of over the course of an hour, it's figured out that the killer, named Watkins, the titular Maul, that's his what he calls himself, um, is actually depressed as well because he's very narcissistic and he's not important anymore, and he's nothing in prison. So he's actually trying to egg the psychologist on to kill him because he doesn't want to admit that he's too weak to kill himself because of his narcissism. And it's kind of I really wanted to examine a look at two characters who meet up on opposite ends of a spectrum, who are both suffering from very, Maul's depression is very kind of arch and very out there. It's not. I didn't try to go particularly realistic with mostly his narcissism, but with the psychologist Frank, I did, and I want him to be able to look at that and see this mythic figure kind of reduced to he's the same. Like all psychology kind of ends up going back to the same place, and I wanted the catharsis of recognizing depression in somebody else to be able to break you out of your own.
It almost hurts me to say that that's not that was never actually made into a film.
Writing the mall really like took me to some dark, like took a lot out of me. Like it was some dark stuff because you're dealing with mourning of a dead child. You're going to some really dark places, and I had to struggle with, can I go as far with how dour this gets, um, because it's so dour, and you have to kind of allow yourself to go there because as someone who has suffered from depression, life gets really dour sometimes. So, and I think seeing that in art, at least for me, is always very cathartic.
Oh yeah. I One thing people may not really know about you is you are an advocate for mental health awareness, and I believe me and you were speaking about something that one of your projects you were in the making of geared toward mental health awareness.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I came up with this idea. About a year ago, and just kind of working on it with myself. I haven't really. You're really the only person I've brought it up to and pitched it to. Um, I was inspired by a few different things. Um, number one is I was just kind of reinvigorating myself last year through some hardships I was going through mental health wise, and part of that was diving back into the horror community. That's when I kind of made my social media accounts and like let me just connect a little bit. Because after a hard time, I tend to get very insular whenever things get not very good. And I was just reminded of how much like all of that really made me feel better. Like it gave me a homey feeling when Shudder brought back Joe Bob Briggs. And I think this showed a lot of people how positive the horror community could be, and how
Mhm.
the horror community really still loves the communal experience, because those being live and people being able to chat with a um, vast population of the horror family, because it's really the horror family at the end
Mhm.
of the day.
Oh yeah.
Um, it reminded me so much of how I fell in love with horror when I was a kid. and the weird comfort I found in it, like horror, heavy metal, comic books, um, but definitely especially horror. Like I think I've told stories like this on Box Office Pulp before, like watching Hellraiser when I was like 5, seeing Videodrome when I was like 7, and it usually turns into a joke of like, oh, so that's why Mike is Mike. I gravitated towards those things. I didn't have a lot of friends. I didn't understand a lot of what was going on with me. I was suicidal pretty much from the age of 10, and I didn't understand why. I've tried to kill myself about 5 times in my life. I've suffered from like lots of different things, and went out it alone. Now I was terrified of. I even hid kind of being a horror fan a lot of the time because I was afraid of being shown to be different. But whenever I was with other people who liked horror, I felt so comfortable. And finding the horror community throughout the years really brought me out of my shell more and more. And through podcasting, I was able to find that as well, just being able to kind of embrace that side of me more and being okay with it. And a lot in media and stuff, you always see like the weird person who's into horror, but they have a heart of gold, or they're really just a loner, but they're good. They're just they're troubled or something like that, and that's very true. But at the same time, you never really get to see like, hey, you ever been to like a horror convention? It's lovely. Like, you ever just
Yeah. Open
got a bunch
arms.
of horror fans in a room, like they're having a great time, but
Yeah.
a lot of them are troubled, yeah, but they find family in one another. Like it seems ridiculous to people that you're watching Friday the 13th, and Jason's beating somebody against a tree in a sleeping bag, and this is bringing people together, and it's
Yeah.
doing positive things for your mental health. But
Exactly. You're like, because in your mind, I think it's going, oh, I wish I could do that to somebody. And the person sitting on the right of you is like, yeah, get that. Bitch." And then the one sitting next to them is like clapping and cheering at like the oddest moments. They're like, yeah, do it again. It's that energy. It's no different than if you go to a convention for writing or really anything like that that's bringing people together. it's it's extremely positive.
very much so, and horror's cathartic. I've always said it's like I prefer real monsters because there's just too many. I prefer fake monsters because there's too many real ones. Like, my life feels haunted because of the things that go on with my chemistry. So I'd rather watch a ghost movie. I'd rather read a ghost story, or read some goosebumps, or read up on a serial killer or something else. My therapist always asks me like, what do you get out of like all the dark stuff? Like, isn't that just that seems weird to me? And it's like, but it's not. Like when you're one of us, it's not scary. It's a release. It's You get to experience something completely outside of you, and it's something that you can latch your identity onto in a way that connects you to other people. And I met this person a couple years ago who worked for kind of this independent like community center, I guess you could call it. Um, and they would always tell me about it, that it was kind of like designed as a safe place for people between the ages of like 13 and 20. And they would get together, they'd cook, they'd watch, anime or movies, or just hang out or do book clubs or play games. And it was just, just this little place where people could go. There was nothing behind it, a place to get community for people who maybe, don't have the family aspects they need, or they're troubled, or just give them some place to go. So that way, if they have a hard time making friends, they have some place. And I always thought, what a great concept that is. And while I'd love to, be able to do something like that, obviously not quite capable, but I thought like, but I could kind of do something like that media wise, with a podcast or kind of create a community off of a podcast. So I started workshopping in my head, and I haven't quite named it yet, but it's something I really want to do this year is start a show where we celebrate that positive side of the horror community, where break down a lot of, I think, cliched barriers of what the horror community is, because we're a bit insular, and we like to be private. We don't like a lot of outsiders looking at our horror stuff, but break it down kind of an interview show where I want to bring people on and talk to them, people who've been in trouble with mental illness, and they find something in horror, what horror means to people, in the horror family. It doesn't necessarily need to be mental illness. They could just have a hardship. I've seen people get over deaths of family members
Mhm.
through horror fiction. And it's something that is very specific to terror fans. Other people can't quite wrap their head around, like, so you got over this horrible thing with a horrible thing. That's you know
It's a little contradictive, isn't it? But no.
yeah, it makes perfect sense in our brains. And
Yes. I think that that's helped out a lot of famous horror directors and writers. I believe Guillermo del Toro, he saw somebody actually, I don't know if they were beheaded or shot in his old village in Mexico, and that was kind of the inspiration and the backstory behind the Devil's Backbone.
yeah, I believe he was
But
shot. Yeah, he
yeah,
ultimately got shot.
just like Tom Savini, he was a photographer in war, and he seen real life, like, dismemberment and people being blown up, and that served as a positive reinforcement for him in his prop making skills and even directing. So yeah, definitely there are positive aspects that come out of it, but I think it has to be instilled in your creative side first. It has to be there within you and be almost awakened in some way or utilized.
Very much so. Horror is the most important fiction and storytelling of this is hyperbolic here, but of humanity, really. Um, the horror, when broken down from a philosophical or psychological point of view, is the oldest form of storytelling, and it's used as a language for learning for humans to survive. Some of the oldest. Well, why are we afraid of the dark? Well, because a very long time ago, the storytelling was done to teach people or children and whatnot huddled around a campfire to stay out of the dark, because predators come out at night. You can get lost in the dark, and it instills in us psychologically that the dark is scary. And there's not really anything actually scary about the dark, really, but through that's what we think of. Um, I've
Yeah.
always said that there's the Socks and Busk, the two Greek masks of storytelling, tragedy and comedy. I've always felt like there should be a third one up there that has like fangs and blood splatter on it, because horror is just as important, can bring out so much of those other two things. I think it's a mistake when and everybody does it. I mean, look at every time there's a new popular horror movie, it has to be called not horror, um, because horror is the most important thing to people.
Hmm.
It is able to say the most politically, psychologically, societally, and I think it's overlooked as to what it means to people, as what people can get out of it to better themselves, to get over things. Like I honestly can say I wouldn't have survived as long as I have if it weren't for something as silly as Hellraiser 2. Like, it's ridiculous sounding, but it's true. Like,
I mean, I have movies. I have movies that do the same for me. Trust me. I went through a real bad breakup, younger, mom say like in the like 8, almost 10 years ago, and I was getting used to the idea of expressing feelings and really putting myself out there with another person. And it was awful breakup, but one of the only things that got me through that and really enlightened me to something else was The Crow. And it's not just because it's in my opinion one of the best, not just love stories but just comics in of all time.
Definitely.
But it was that story about love really never dying, somebody coming back from the other side and avenging, learning more about himself when after he died than he would have maybe when he was alive. And it's like that rebirthing of yourself in a way. And it's still a beautiful story nonetheless, but that got me through. And then I was going, I mean, I suffer as well. I have a brain disease, and it's taken a toll on me throughout my life. I've had all kinds of other health problems around it. I've been bullied in school when I was younger. I've been through homelessness on and off. And one of the only things that got me through those periods, believe it or not, was watching Tim Burton movies, like Edward Scissorhands, even some of like Ed Wood, just really weird sort of films, but it got me through. And I still watch those films.
Hey, sometimes when I feel sad, I put on the Blair Witch Project. I'm not looking for Josh. Um,
Oh my god. There's a funny story I told my last a guest on my other podcast, when that movie just came out on VHS, I believe, like when we were able to rent it. I was visiting my grandfather up in Idaho, and he lives out in the mountain area. And everybody out there, they don't play around. Like, they know you come in at a certain time at night because the bears are out. So we were in a back room. It was me and my little sister, and I think the Rosie O'Donnell show was pretty popular around that time. And I think, and she had a doll that you squeeze and it would give like quotes of the show, like "Here's Rosie" and
oh
things like
yeah.
that. You remember that doll?
God help me, I do.
Okay. And so I think that somebody in the household had got it. That movie was on, and I think my sister, I think it was my mom and my cousin wanted to just be assholes at the time, but my sister was misbehaving. So we were in that back room, and the movie was on, and all of a sudden they're scratching at the door and like knocking and then scratching, and that damn doll was underneath the door, and that's all you could hear was "Here's Rosie," and it scared the hell out of my sister. Like, are you gonna be good now?
I know I personally would be terrified by Rosie O'Donnell clawing at my door.
Speaking of lightening the mood a bit, I wanted to go back to your guys' last podcast on the Pet Sematary. You guys had mentioned there was a song called Pet Sematary, right? It was by the Ramones, right?
Yeah, the Ramones and
Okay.
Starcrawlers do the cover of it for the new film.
Did you know that there was actually when Child's Play originally came out, they had a theme song for that was real similar, but it never got released.
No, I didn't know that.
I'm gonna put a link to that in the in the description below so people can hear this. But it was hilarious. It was Simon Stokes back in the 80s, and he performed the song, and it was like, it was a, "Hey there, I'm Lucky, pleased to meet you, call me Chucky, I'll always be your very best friend." It was, it gets worse because there's children like doing like the "Hey Mickey" like thing in the background, like CHUK, why don't you come out and play? And it
The
was
hell?
it was awful.
Oh my god, I'm definitely finding this. Okay, if we're trading bad, inappropriate horror movie songs that were never released, I forget who it's by, but David Cronenberg's The Fly
Oh no.
originally had a song called Help Me. The producers put it together because they had no idea what movie was actually being made. And for some reason, they were under the impression the movie was like a love story. So
I mean,
over
in
the
a way, I guess maybe it was, but
yeah, just with
kind of.
copious amounts of body horror and
Yes.
like
Oh
penises
yeah.
falling off and whatnot. So they had a song commission called "Help Me" that was a love song that was supposed to play over like the end credits, and they were going to have like this big like marketing push over and like this whole media thing. Then they saw the movie and realized what a horrible idea that would have been and how inappropriate it would have been. And it's an hilarious song. It's a
Oh,
total power ballad
oh
about
no.
the David Cronenberg Fly film. Um, and man, is it inappropriate. Can somebody do a metal cover of that song? That'd be great.
We'll get our own like special release just of that, and maybe The Fly.
Please, also The Fly. That'd be great. I love how many side projects I got you doing now.
I'm excited! Yay! Yeah,
Yay.
nothing but time and business, of course, and sleeping and eating and all that. But I'll make time in between. It's cool.
Always time for stupid.
That's a wonderful slogan. Always time for stupid. Right next to Idiot Sandwich. You remember that Gordon Ramsay's Idiot Sandwich and the earmuffs that came out? Everybody was.
Oh yeah. Pop
Find
culture.
those. I'm going to get a pair. I'll send you a pair too. But man, that's great.
Oh please.
Idiot Sandwich. And there's always time for stupid, right?
Always time for stupid will be on my tombstone.
Oh, Mike. Well, it was an absolute pleasure speaking to you today. I needed a good laugh, so thank you for taking me back, down memory lane.
You are very welcome. Thank you for having me. This has been a lot of fun.
Absolutely. And I think that us being more open, if anybody out there is listening to this, whether you're one of my followers or his, if you're dealing with depression or mental or physical illness, there is help for you and you really aren't alone, especially in the community that we share. So if somebody's listening to this, hopefully we can help you in some way.
Yeah, I'll always find somebody to reach out. There's hotlines or just even if you just talk casually to another horror fan about something, you can reach out to them. Trust me, horror fans are the best people in the world. I will always say that to the end of time. And even if if you're interested in my idea that I'm working on, and you'd like to even be a part of it, or if you just want to reach out to tell your story in some way, hit me up on Twitter or whatever. Just I love to collect a good list of people who'd like to eventually be on that project and help create a safe space for horror fans.
I'll put Mike's contact info to his Twitter and podcast and all that, and also in the links below for people to reach out to you.
Great. Thank you so much. Oh, and remember to also subscribe and rate Box Office Pulp on iTunes and Stitcher. I've made Cody happy, my co-host.
Hey, Cody.
Well, I know a kind of a personal quote that's always gotten me through. Your suffering will be legendary even in hell.
That's true. Ooh, I got goosebumps on that one. And as always, you're an idiot sandwich, and there's always time for stupid, everybody.
Always time for stupid.
All our information will be in the links below. I want to thank Mike for coming on to my show today and giving us a little walk down memory lane, having a good laugh. All right, guys, this is Spooky Gal's Corner. As always, signing off. Stay spooky.
Stick with you until the very end. Then much to my surprise, he rolled his head and he blinked his eyes. So I took him home to be my very own. And things were really going swell till my auntie slipped and fell. And Chucky laughed and said, now we're alone. C-H-U-C-K, why'd you come out and play? Listen up, fool. Let's get up. What you drink? Let's get up. It's so fuzzy. Boy, I